Welcome everyone to the More Than I Do Virtual Life podcast. My name is Cherelle.
And I'm Derrick.
And the podcast is really about being married and being in business. Why? Because no one's talking about it. Derrick and I have been married for 16 years and in business for 8 years. And we frankly have something to say. But today we wanted to take a chance and bring in some people that have probably more to say than we do. And that's Mrs. Sandra Miller-Jones and Mr. Lafayette Jones, who've been married for 34 years and in business for over 40 years together. How are you guys doing today?
We're great. Thank you so much. We're glad to be here with you.
Thank you for being here. We're super excited to have you today. Now, we're just going to jump right on into things and kind of talk about some stuff, being married and being in business. And we want to start right at the beginning. How did you two meet?
Oh, well, I won't let Lafayette tell that story because it's very long when he does. But Lafayette, you want to just say a little bit about that?
I was in my office in Southern California, doing very well, but kind of unhappy with the way my job circumstances were going. I had been running Orville Redenbacher Gourmet Popcorn and Hunt's Manwich and Hunt's Tomato Paste. These are what are called mega brands. And I was working for ConAgra after a background at P&G, Unilever, Kraft, and others. And I was sitting there and the phone rang and a young lady said, "Hi, my name is Sandy." I laughed and I said, "Okay." And she said, "I am calling you because I heard that you could be a terrific vice president at a company that I am doing work for." She had started Segmented Marketing Services in the late 70s, 1978. "And I would like for you to come to Chicago and interview the chairman and founder of Johnson Products Company, Ultra Sheen, Afro Sheen, all of those, first company in the American Stock Exchange." And I said to her, "No, thank you." And she said, "Why is that?" I said, "I'm living in Southern California where the sun shines a lot. I have a new convertible. I'm not very happy with my job, and I'm living at the beach, and other things are happening in my life, which I'm pretty pleased about." And she said, "You know, I heard from a friend of hers said that you were very good at what you did, but you had a lot to say." And she said, "Why don't you just catch a plane and come to Chicago?" And I did. And there, my life changed that day. I met Mr. George Johnson, whose net worth was $50 million at the time. And that's how I met Sandy Miller-Jones. I came to her house, and she was such a smart, attractive person. She said, "Let me take you to Mr. Johnson's office." And that was the beginning of our business, friendship, and later marriage.
He neglected to say that when he got there, he had a huge afro on his head and, and a scraggly beard, and had to be kind of cleaned up before he was introduced. But he was more than worth it.
It kind of was. You might be smart, but you don't look like our vice president. I had
that California lifestyle.
California lifestyle, you know. Lime gold suits and sandals and shoulder pocket books and so forth, and just in many ways like it is today in terms of very casual dress. And I did have a very scraggly beard that didn't grow that well, but I liked it. And I had hair all over my head. My hair was bigger than I was. And so they took me downtown to Chicago to redress me and get a haircut. And when you saw me again, people didn't know who I was. Of course, I got the job with her urging.
Yes, but you know he must have been excellent in order to get the job, no matter what he looked like. He brought some excellent skills to the table.
Wow.
Yeah. And Sandy encouraged me and told me about some of the trials and tribulations that the company was having a deep economic problem against some competitive forces. And they had very good brands. And these were folks that Mr. Johnson started the company from scratch. He had been a laboratory assistant and had been in the car washing business and was friends at that time with Don Cornelius, Soul Train. And the two of them, Mr. Johnson launched the company and they advertised and promoted. Well, the rest of the story was, at the time I had several executive assistants, and I was a very serious person because I really wanted to do this job well. And so I came to my office early one morning around 7:45, 7:30, and Sandy was sitting in my office. And I said, well, how did you get in here? And she says, you'd be surprised who I know. She says, you remember, I got you the job. So I said, well, what would you like? And she said, I would like to be a consultant to the company because I think I can be of value to you. And I made the mistake of saying, well, sweetie, what can you do? And she says, sweetie has an MBA from the Kellogg School of Business, and I probably know more about this business than you do. And actually, she did. And she came on board as our consultant and helped us to reorganize ourselves.
So let me get this right. So she found you to get hired for this job, and then turned around and then you gave her a job.
That's right.
She asked for the order, and I was, when you work in the corporate world at fairly high levels, you don't know much about being an entrepreneur. You know the fundamentals of running a business and all the things that one would do if you have all kinds of resources. Well, this was a great company, but it didn't have all the resources, like some research that it needed. And I had to quickly learn how to be an entrepreneur. And she was very helpful in that arena. Sandy had worked at Quaker and had run $100 million brands there, but she has always had an eye for being an entrepreneur.
And just thinking about the difference between working in the corporate world and the entrepreneur world, when I first started as an entrepreneur, I had such an elaborate budget, just everything written down, and I forgot that I had to pay myself. So by the time the money was gone, I had nothing left.
Oh,
So I had to start again, understanding that I had to be paid as well.
Well, one of the things that's very interesting about our early relationship was that I called another vice president who reported to me, and I said, Sandra McNeil at the time was her last name, I'm going to send a young lady down, sign a contract, and take care of the rest. Well, I didn't say any more about it, and she came back, came to my office, and she was there again. I said, how can I help you? She says, you did everything, but I didn't get any money. I said, what do you mean you didn't get any money? You know, my corporate process was, if I say it's to be done, it's to be done, and it happens. I come back and did it happen? Yes, she was the answer. But in this case, being an entrepreneur, you had to follow it all the way through. So when it came to pay, she says, you know, I'd like to get paid half my money up front. I never heard of such a thing. She said, darling, I'm not the bank. And in order to do what you're asking me to do, I have to finance that. So I need 50% of the contract up front. Great entrepreneurial lesson for those of you who may not know cash flow or have gone broke trying to finance a big company's request and maybe not even getting paid. We've been through that too.
Wow. Wow. So did you get half of the money up front?
Yes. And that's a part of our contractual arrangements, even today, with companies with whom we work.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Which I think is very key. Our business, my local CFO, is an outsourced CFO service business. And that's one of the things that we find a lot of times when people say, I have no money, you can go right to their contracts and they're doing a lot of work up front with no money or little money up front, and then all of it on the back end at delivery, which doesn't work all the time.
No,
most of the time.
Well,
right.
we've learned, Sandy told me at the very beginning why that doesn't work. And we have a fairly elaborate contract with payment schedules. And we don't move anything based on anything anyone said. It's all by contract. And we want to see our funds in our account before we actually start the work. Sometimes we'll, push that a little, but these are with people we've worked with for many years. Things happen at companies. People come and they go, they quit, they get fired, they forget what they said. And oftentimes small companies are so happy to get the business. And there's nothing wrong about being happy about getting the business, because that's a hard effort to get it. But then to be able to do the business because it is properly organized and you're being paid not only properly, but at the right sequence. And so that was my first lesson about being an entrepreneur. And it was a great lesson for me.
Gotcha.
Yes, one thing that we often say and try to live by, but can't do it always, is not to spend the money until the check clears.
That's good.
So often our inclination is to spend money that we plan on getting.
Yeah.
It's not always the case.
And
we can rack it up here. We can rack up how that money's going to be spent and start moving stuff around and have nothing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. Nowadays, there are very elaborate payment systems. There are companies that you have to follow a certain procedure, and you pay yourself based on certain inputs you put into their system. Some of them are very elaborate. And the funds are allocated at the beginning of the project, if you will. And based on certain completion dates, you can authorize payment to yourself. Very sophisticated. And most of it now is online.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of those payment structure contracts when you meet milestones, because it also helps companies budget and plan better as well for the type of resources that you need to fulfill the job.
And keep your consultant or contractor honest, right? On moving towards the goal and not delaying a lot. Now, I want to get back to this because you guys met each other through kind of interviewing and helping each other get jobs and things of that nature. When did that become from a colleague relationship to a serious relationship to marriage?
Oh, okay.
Let's see what your answer is.
Okay. Well, it was a number of years. I don't know. Probably 4 or 5 years between the time that we worked together as colleagues and the time that we decided that we wanted to be together as a couple. And it kind of evolved. He had left to go to California, and then he came back to Chicago, where SMSI and I was based. And we started doing some projects together then. And as the projects progressed, so did our relationship.
Mm-hmm. So you love California, but couldn't stay away from Chicago, is what I'm hearing.
Well, it's absolutely true. I came to visit her one day and brought some flowers and chocolate, chocolates. She likes chocolates.
And a girlfriend.
Right? she never forgets. It was someone that I knew. I don't know if she was a girlfriend. But, I was a bachelor by then, and I intended to stay that way because I kind of like being on my own and not having all that goes with being married and all of that. And so I heard that she was sick, and I liked her. She's a nice person. And I came by to see her and brought her some chocolates and so forth. And then one day she said to me, I win a lot of awards and I go places, but I don't have anyone to take me. And I said, oh, I'll be glad to take you, as long as it's over by 9 o'clock at night, because I don't go out till 11:30, and that's just kind of the way it was. I worked very hard, but I also had a very engaging social life and a big club life. I had a lot of fun, and taking her out and being back by 9 o'clock was just wonderful, because then I could go out to the clubs and see what was happening, and one of my favorite clubs in Chicago is something called the Cotton Club. And it was lots of great music and all of that. But as time went on, a friend of mine said, I see you with Sandy Miller. Sandy McNeil. I said, yeah. He said, what's that all about? I said, oh, she's just a little friend of mine. I like her. He said, well, you know, she's a very special person, and we like her too, and you should stop going around her because we don't think you would be very good for her. She's a very serious, well-educated woman, and you're good at what you do, but you're just a little nuts. So one thing led to another. We started to go out and talk to one another. And one day my mother said to me, I asked Tate, I said, why don't you come to visit my mother and father? You might like them. They're really nice people. I'm going up there. I'll take you to Niagara Falls, blah, blah, blah. And she said, I wonder, we'll be glad to go. She said she'd be glad to go. So I got there. My mother said, and where did you find this cutie pie? I said, it's a long story. And my father, she had this great mink coat of my father, who's an old Buffalonian, said, and young lady, where'd you get that nice mink coat from? And she said, well, I bought it for myself, Mr. Jones. And my father said back in his chin, he said, got her own money too. You know. And but one thing led to another, and finally we started talking, and Sandy's always been a lady who wanted to have a house full of children. Well, I didn't want a house full of children because my children were teenagers who were growing up, so I'd kind of done that one. You know, I'd done the babysitting and the Indian guides and all the things that go with that. And I did a fairly good job, but so we started talking. She says, you know, I'd like to maybe have a 2 babies. And I looked at her and I said, what? You know, 2 babies. I said, I don't think so. So my mother said to me one day, months later, what happened to Cutie Pie? I said, you never would believe this. Cutie Pie wants 2 babies.
I think he's making this up as he goes along. Half of these things I don't remember.
No, she doesn't
I don't believe.
We ended up in a very serious situation. We ended up adopting a wonderful little baby. We decided to marry. And my mother said, and what's wrong with a pretty girl like that having a baby? I said, nothing wrong with that. It's just, you know, if you get a baby, you got to take care of a baby. And I've come from the kind of family as a man, if you have a family, you take care of your family. And you do all those things that many people say black men don't do well. Well, that's never been my problem. And I don't think it's true for many, many black men. I think we get a bad rap on that. Now, some of us don't. But I'm just talking about even the wild roustabouts that I know. They take care of their family and their children, and that's what this is about.
Yeah, we were very fortunate to be able to adopt a lovely, beautiful young baby, 5 months old, and now she's 31 years old, and has just been the light of our lives for all of these years, and we continue to look forward to more wonderful experiences with Dr. Bridget Jones Brooks now. She's been married 4 whole years, so we're cheering for them.
All right. Now, tell me this, because you guys were in business before you were married, or kind of started some business more so before you got married. Tell me, how did that come about?
Well, each of us had a business of our own before we were married. And somewhere along the line, we combined our efforts so that we were working more closely together. For many years, we worked in the same business, and then we decided that having a business of our own had some real advantages for us personally, as well as our ability to be able to spread our efforts so that we could cover more territory. And so now we are back to having individual businesses, but both under an umbrella. SMSI Companies is the umbrella, but I'm chair of SMSI Healthy Living Solutions, and Lafayette is chair of SMSI Urban Call Marketing. So we work together, but still have that independence of separate businesses.
Which makes a lot of sense for leader type personalities, if you will, type A's. I'm more type A than she is, but I think that gives a married couple in the business some room to move around. and to also have their own money too, to put it together at the right time. But it is taking us a while to figure that out, but we're pretty much there. But the business changes, life changes, we change, and so you have to change the circumstances of how you are organized and what your goals are. I always wanted to be a publisher, and I am a publisher today of our own supplements. We make for SMSI Urban Call, we make newspaper inserts or special editions of publications, which we distribute through Sandy's church network, beauty network, barber network of tens of thousands of community venues in 35 to 40 markets in the U.S. And so I must say the business has been additive in many ways. Her father helped Sandy to create the SMSI Church Family Network, which you might want to take a moment and talk about.
Yeah, we've got about 10,000 churches now across the country that work with us to outreach to their congregations and to their other constituencies. And we've got the ability through the church network and the beauty network that Lafayette brought to the table for us and helped us to develop, and barber network, and then some other community-based venues. We can reach within a 4 to 6 week period at least 50% of the African-American households in any market that our clients choose.
Wow. Wow.
Wow. Wow.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's amazing. I want to go back a second. What was that first project that y'all realized that, oh, wow, we can really work together and do something amazing?
Goodness, I can't recall which one was our first project. It may have been the work that we were doing for Procter & Gamble. Because it took us like at least 5 years to penetrate the Procter & Gamble corporation. And we've delivered millions of product samples of their Tide and Scope and Crest and other products through our networks over the years. So it was probably that Procter & Gamble project where we were putting together.
Yeah. So the Procter & Gamble project was that one of one of the bigger kind of first projects that you worked on together?
Yes.
Wow.
Well, it happened that there were a series of large projects that happened one right after another. For Procter & Gamble, we were doing Tide and a couple of other of their detergents and other products, and they seemed to happen every quarter. And these we were distributing anywhere from 1 to 3 million samples into these 25 or 30 markets, which we had to, recruit people and find people in these different markets. And it turned out that the people that we recruited for the business were folks that we knew who lived in the various cities, who became what we call market managers. These are people who know everything that's in a zip code. The number of churches, beauty salons, barbershops, billboards. They know the fabric of the community. A lot of them already work in community jobs like the Urban League, or they may have some other role in the community. So Black entrepreneurs, and this is true of the beauty industry in particular, in the first MBAs that really, Masters of Business Administration, that really showed up were in the late 60s, early 70s. No one had ever been to business school. And that was just the beginning where many jobs are opening up to African Americans that we never had before. So we often worked in companies where we were the only ones. And many things that we were looking for to do the kind of work that we needed done, well, Black folks, and we hired more than just Black folks, but predominantly Black folks, did not have any so-called experience as in a particular job. So we had to learn to convert people. That is also very true of the beauty business, and they just found smart people, and they taught themselves to do what was necessary. Often entrepreneurs are faced with that, where they have to educate and train a staff. Nowadays, you're more fortunate to be able to find some of the young folks who might have been working in distribution or operations or marketing research prior to coming to work with you.
Yes, and to put it in context, our first mission, corporate mission, was to provide free product samples to people in the community who are likely not getting product free samples from any other source, so that they can have an opportunity like the general market to try their product before they have to buy it. So that was our first mission, and that's why we were so anxious to penetrate companies like P&G, Procter & Gamble, and Unilever. Quaker Oats was where I worked as my only corporate job. That's my only job I ever had.
She says that often. That's the only job she ever had.
As a professional. Of course, I worked many jobs as a teenager and through college. But because that was my first job, the Quaker Oats was also our first client. So that was a great thing, that transition. So it's always great if you don't burn bridges and you can cross that bridge with whomever you were with on the other side. Take them with you.
Yeah. And just imagine that Sandy's first contract with Quaker Oats came from the boss she was working with, the person she reported to. She was working on Captain Crunch and found that African Americans had a particular proclivity to purchase and consume that product. And she asked the company that was doing the sampling, well, are you giving any of these to African Americans? And they said no. And she asked her boss, she showed them the research and told her boss about it. And believe it or not, there's some really good folks in this world. He later became chairman. Bill Smithburg was his name. He gave her the office furniture that she had, a contract for the business before she left. Imagine.
And it always helps.
Yeah. So, these making friends and influencing people and keeping relationships really, really work. Nowadays, many of the people who went on to become chairman or senior vice president, some of them have left the company, started other companies. If you're really good at it and you really have good relationships, you can call and say, my line is, hi, this is Lafayette. He knows me. Just ask him to pick up. Now, this is the chairman of a major company, and I don't call him very often. I don't, wear my welcome out. And they'll pick up the phone and we'll say, this is what we're trying to do, and maybe you can be of help here.
And that's another good lesson that we learned over the years, to the extent that you can go to the top of the company, even if you don't know the people, and ask for the business, you're better off. Because more often than not, the chairman of the company or president and CEO will send the correspondence that you provide to them down to someone that they know. And they don't know anybody that's below the vice presidential level. So your message gets sent still at a very high level in the company.
And it gets attended to, because if the chairman or the senior VP sends a message to you saying, take a look at this, guess what? They take a look.
Yeah. So let me ask you this on that note, because I think it would be great for our viewers. So you talked about Sandy, you talked about Lafayette, you talked about knowing the person and building the relationship, which business is all about building relationships. But then we talked about, Sandy, not knowing the person and trying to get to them as fast as you can. So what do you do if you don't have that relationship to get to that top person?
Well, we usually start by sending a letter. It used to be a hard copy letter. Now we're trying to get their email address so that we can send an email that just is an explanation of what you want as succinctly as you can possibly put it, and an understanding of who you are, and ask for a meeting. I usually start off with, I would appreciate an opportunity to talk with you. And even though I suspect I'm not going to talk to them, but I sometimes do.
Sometimes you do, especially if you'd be amazed, and this was before coronavirus and all the virtual things that are happening, you'd be amazed at who works after 6 o'clock or who gets to the office at 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning. And if you call up sometimes and there are ways that you can learn to get through the system, that person will pick up the telephone. And Mr. Johnson, John Ace Johnson, who was one of my mentors, he created Ebony and Jet and so forth, went to work for him a little later in life. He used to say all the time, don't ask strangers to have lunch. They don't know you, okay? And they probably may not even go to lunch that often themselves because they probably work through lunch. What you do is if you have an opportunity to talk to someone, you simply say, I just need 5 minutes of your time and I want to share something with you. Do you have 5 minutes? Now, if you get to 5 minutes and you're there an hour later, it means they were really interested. If you get to 3 minutes and they say, well, you know what the story is there. But you have to have a heart to ask for what you are after and also be persistent. Mr. Johnson called on the Chrysler Motor Company for 5 years and never got an appointment. 5 years. And finally, Lee Iacocca's son, who he was chairman of Chrysler, came and said, I see you here every month on the same day. Who do you know? He said, I don't know anyone. He says, why do you come here? He says, I'm trying to meet Mr. Iacocca to tell him that Ebony Magazine is a great publication and we may be able to help him sell more Chryslers. Everyone is always interested in marketing or selling or improving what they have. And the young man said, well, let me take you upstairs and introduce you to my father.
And you know, it's not as easy these days as it used to be to make those contacts, to get to people. And so that numbers game, as we all know, marketing is a numbers game. So you just have to spread your wings and contact as many people as you possibly can or attempt to, and somebody's going to talk to you.
And birds of a feather flock together. Later on during this process, I was able to start the American Health and Beauty Aids Institute. You've seen the logo of the proud Black woman on the back of many packages. And it was through that, a company that I had founded called Smith Jones and Associates was a division of Smith Buckland Associates, who had 700 worldwide associations that they managed. And the chairman of the Smith Buckland Associates was also chairman of the Popcorn Institute. I was, because I ran the Orville Redenbacher gourmet business, popping corn business, which was a very successful business, I got to know him pretty well. And he said to me one day, he says, you know, he used to always call me son. You know, son, you probably could do very well in this business if you designed a program that would be helpful to Black associations. And that led to the formation of the American Health and Beauty Aids Institute. We did a lot of work for the National Black MBAs, which they've gone on to do very well, and about 20 other organizations. But it was through the relationship that he asked me, didn't I think that was a good idea? And I asked him, I said, well, how are we going to do this? He says, well, we'll put it together. You'll have offices here. We'll each own half the company. And it was true.
Wow. Wow. Now, let me ask you this. I want to go more into your ventures, but before we go into ventures and different things that you guys have, I want to bring it back to the marriage side just a little bit. So you've been married for 34 years.
Yes.
And have a daughter. What are some of the challenges, or I would say opportunities, right? Because on the other side of challenges are opportunities that you guys have had to learn over the years to get to the 34 years?
Let's see. I guess one of the things is to be able to respect each other, respect your opinions both within the marriage and in the business, because they're the same thing. You're the same people. That doesn't change, and so you've got to realize that when you're in business mode or when you're in marriage mode, it's the same person that you're working with. And so that respect is a big part of our whole success.
And for me, that meant being a better listener. I wasn't always, still sometimes now, the best listener. And over time, through trial and tribulation, I learned why it was a good idea to be a good listener. And plus, we also have if we're someplace and we're in a meeting and we're seated next to each other, she will step on my foot often when I'm going off the track or may not be grasping. And so we've learned a set of signals that we can, this is beyond texting. It's the look, it's the, it's a way of communicating. It's like playing basketball. You know, basketball players and people in sports communicate with one another, not necessarily using words to do it. Could be head motion, body motion, also having a plan before you go and being in agreement on that. And the other thing too is we also learn we don't have to agree on everything. We just don't. I mean, it's nice to agree on the important things, but it's okay to have a different point of view. And I've learned that for me, it's paid big dividends.
Yeah, they're definitely cut from the same cloth, Mr. Jones, because this one here grabs my arm quite frequently when I'm going off the track, because I had to learn how to listen myself.
And it's an ongoing process. But during 34 years, a lot of different things happen. You have a child that grows from being an infant all the way to an adult who's married and doing her postdoctoral work, which finishes August the 4th this year, which is graduation, which is a great thing. And at the same time, you're continuing with the aging of your parents. You know, we all have parents, and caregiving is an important process. My mother and father moved from Buffalo to where we live now in North Carolina. And my wife said to me, you know, your parents are getting older. Okay, tell me something else I don't know. But I wasn't paying much attention, you know. My mom and dad, they're there, they're going to be there forever, right? Wrong. And she says, you should think about having them come to move in the same city we live in. And I said to myself, now that's just not going to happen, because I know my parents and so forth. And I said, I don't think so, because who's going to ask them? And she said, just a minute. And she brought our little one to the telephone, and 4-year-olds, 3-year-olds know how to use a telephone, and their grandparents love them. And she said to my mother, how'd you like to come and live in the same city we're in? And my mother said, I would be delighted. Couldn't believe it. Now that had a big impact on the business, because after my mother was here a little while, she decided she wanted a job. And I said to him that same day, I said, she wants a job. What are you going to do about it? Who's going to give her a job? And she had just gotten her college degree. She was in her late 60s, early 70s. And she says, you are. Let's make her the director of community relations. She was terrific.
Mm-hmm. That's very true. And, you know, another thing that I found to be important, I think Lafayette would agree. If you're working together and married too, each of us needs to have some outside interest that are ours alone, so that you have some time and some space that you can use for just yourself.
Wow. So what are some of you guys' outside interests?
Well, my number one charity is the YWCA. It's been a favorite of mine for as long as I can remember. So I chaired the board of the Y here for a while and continue to be on that board. And then there's the AKAs, of course, and the Links and those female organizations. And so right now, because of the circumstances, we aren't able to interact very much with any of them, but those are my favorites.
So before we go to Lafayette, I want to just clarify for our viewers, right? Because all of our viewers are not African American. So AKA stand for
Alpha Kappa Alpha. That's a sorority.
And the link?
And the Links is a civic organization and service organization of professional women.
Thank you.
Yes.
I always wanted to be a publisher because I knew lots of people who had done that successfully in different parts of the country, but I didn't want to be a publisher that did periodicals on a standard subscription basis. So I happened to be successful enough to build a model. I was doing a newsletter, which was also being included with the samples that Sandy was getting from the companies to distribute. And I said one day, why don't you just put a little newsletter in there? She says, sure. So I wrote this newsletter. It was a one-pager. And I said, what are we going to call it? She says, call it Urban Call. She's very good at names. And I did that. And then one day someone called and said, how come we don't get the newsletter anymore? We only get the newsletter when samples come. I said, because that's the only time I do the newsletter is when we send you a sample. And people began to send notes, and then that has gone all the way to where we are now, where it's a blog, it's newspaper columns, and that's for Mr. Jimmy Davies at Every Dot Black. He's been working with him a little less than 2 years, and he's been able to help us to convert most of our published properties to a digital basis. Came in very handy recently when the virus hit. We were right there on it, thanks to Mr. Davies. So I got a chance to I like creating things from scratch, and believe it or not, I found that I was pretty good at it. You know, product managers and marketing people are people who put things together and organize them and bring different components together. And that's what I like doing.
So now you guys have accomplished a lot over your life and have a lot to go, I'm sure. What are some of the current campaigns that you're working on?
Well, I'm extremely excited about the campaign that we're executing now to try to help people understand that if they lose their job insurance, they may be able to get insurance from the Affordable Care Act. And so many people just don't know about that and need that health insurance so very badly. So that's a campaign that I'm excited about, and that we've been doing some outreach. Right now we are doing outreach in North Carolina markets, but we're talking to people and hoping that we can get some support to do this in communities across the country.
As we got a little older and learned that all of us, especially entrepreneurs, high stress levels, many people have diabetes or high blood pressure or other chronic illnesses. We repositioned our companies in the mid-90s to work on only things that have to do with health. We only work on, that became part of our core mission. And everything that we do for our community is offered to our community for free, whether it's a sample or a newsletter or a program. It's all about helping our community to improve itself. We have a lot of challenges. We have health challenges, we have economic challenges, and we have many obstacles, hurdles that we have to leap over or around or under. And so we focus on those things. I'm an underdog person. If there's a fight on the street, even if the underdog is outnumbered, I join the underdog. I've always liked fighting for the underdog because in many ways I always have been or consider myself to be an underdog. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is that all the cards weren't stacked in my favor, and so forth. I go back to my college days. John Lewis was my classmate at Fisk University, and this is just a side story. What a wonderful person. He was a wonderful guy when he was sitting in class, falling asleep with bandages on his head because he had been to Selma or some other place. And he said to me one day, Lafayette, you ought to go down there with us. I said, no, John, I don't think so. He says, why not? I said, because I'm a fighter. If they, and I didn't quite understand at the time what nonviolence was about and what they were doing, although I knew most of the people who were involved in the civil rights movement at the very grassroots level. I belong, if you will, to the Malcolm X side of the equation. And we were Chicagoans and New Yorkers and Detroit folks who we believed that if you didn't treat us right, we just have to fight about it. And so those two tensions, by the way, helped bring many things to pass. So it was an interesting time in my life because I was a Northern African-American kid who went to Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee, knowing very little about Black people. Of course, my parents were Black, but I didn't get the history. But when I went to Fisk and I met all those folks in the PhDs and the writers and the art and all those things, it was quite amazing to me. I called my mother on the telephone, and I said, the people in charge of the money are Black here. And she laughed. And because my mother's a Southerner, and Southerners many have a different experience than Northerners. But that doesn't, I don't know, you didn't ask me a question about that. I thought I'd just throw that in.
Yes, and another project that we're working on right now that I think is extremely relevant and exciting is trying to get COVID-19 information to underserved consumers, because so many people are getting confused messages about how they can mitigate this terrible virus that we're fighting right now. And we're trying to give them some clear, unequivocal understanding of what things have proven to work, such as wearing your mask.
And there's just a bunch of common sense rules that can be to our benefit. In the consumer world that we grew up and learned about, largely African Americans, Latinos, and Asians to some degree have been underserved in all the ways you can think of. And I am so proud of what I'm seeing happen in the streets of America, and as a matter of fact, the streets of the world, London and Paris and Asian countries, about Black Lives Matter. I think the young people have taken it to another level. Our fight initially was for public accommodations, but we learned over time that just wasn't enough. You could have the money and you could have the degrees, and you still weren't treated fairly or even equally. So so I think what is being done now makes an awful lot of sense. And you talk about how Black men feel about the police. I grew up as a young man whose father always taught him every day, he'd tell me, every day, if the policeman tells you to move, you move out the way. Because he wasn't so eloquent. He would say, we have a lot of bad experiences well, you know, so-and-so didn't come home. He looked different when he came home because these folks were being abused by the police. So I grew up with actually a fear and a great respect. Even now, we were visiting some friends in a southern city and got outside in the suburban, in a rural area, and I looked up and all of a sudden I'm doing 35 and the cop stops me. But I could feel the, not fear, but concern. I knew something wasn't, so I did the usual. I put my hands on top of the steering wheel. I didn't say anything. I got very quiet. And after it was over, my wife said to me, you know, you did that pretty well. Because, you know, there was a time when I'd have to ask you for your badge, you know, and why you stopped me and what you want. I'm doing 35, and, you know, that would lead to a confrontation. And it's not that my point of view may not, I did speed sometimes out, but it's not that my point of view wasn't right. You hear people say to their black sons, now, we want you to survive to tomorrow, and do those things that'll help you move on.
And of course, we understand that there are so many wonderful, dedicated law enforcement agents out there.
Mm-hmm.
And we applaud them. It's just the ones that are not. That,
and at the forefront of those jobs across America, there are many people, African Americans and others, who are in leadership roles, and those are tough jobs. Imagine being the captain of the police in a city, and you're African American, but they're doing a good job, and this is just a new day and a new level. And I'm saying I thank you for saying that, because over the years we've met some folks who are particularly talented leaders for fire departments, what you call essential workers, police department, the emergency management. Lots and lots of black folks have gone into those careers, and not just black folks, lots of good folks. But I talk a lot about black folks because I'm black, and I want to give due to all those folks who are involved in doing a good job.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, one of the questions that I had for the two of you were that you're such a power couple. And I don't know, I'm sure you've heard that word before, of being a power couple, because individually in your own right, you stood alone and did powerful things, right? And then you got together and kind of magnified that through your strengths that you had for yourself, each other's strengths. So out of those strengths, how did you guys realize kind of weaknesses and cover each other in your weaknesses? Through marriage and business.
Oh, I'm sorry. What was your last statement?
Through marriage and business.
Ah, okay. Well, living together with a person gives you an opportunity to really know them well. And so it's not easy. It was not difficult to see where each of us needed to be shored up. I, for example, am much more inclined to just take things at face value rather than doing any in-depth research. And Lafayette is the person who is going to ask all of the right questions and ask them over and over again until we get all of the answers that we need. And I'll let Lafayette talk about his own challenges and how we might have faced those.
Well, one of the things I had to come to grips with in my business career, I always surrounded myself with good finance people because that wasn't my skill set. So I would always find when I worked in corporations, someone who I intuitively knew marketing. I've run big, large marketing brands. And so I would always find someone in the business who wanted to be in marketing, but also worked in the finance department. They make great combinations. I teach them marketing and they'd watch the numbers. You know, we call them the shotgun people. They ride in the shotgun position and they alert all the time, they alert you to what is happening to business. So in our business, Sandy is a financial manager who knows the most and who can track the numbers and who can work with the financial people. It's never been a great interest of mine. My interest was, so that's another thing, knowing what you do well and what you don't do well, and getting out of the way to let the person who has the most experience or competence do it. So if you come to us, you don't want to ask me a lot of financial questions. I can answer the questions now. I mean, and I can eventually figure it out, but I'm not the speedy one. I'm more on strategy, creativity. If we're creating an ad or we're creating it, and now it's in the virtual world. I understand it as Mr. Davies helps me in terms of just the nomenclature, which is important. But I'm a creative. I'm the creative type, and so it took me a while to figure that out.
And those answers apply to both business and our personal life, really.
Wow.
So across the board.
Across the board.
Mm-hmm. And how is our timing, by the way?
We're almost we're wrapping up now. Yes, ma'am.
I have one question. I've been sitting, soaking in, so I want to thank you for just speaking with us today. Yeah, you speak a lot about community activism, showing, making sure that the community receives proper information, and it seems like that comes from your days of being marketers out in the community. What are some of the similarities that you're finding today from back in your corporate days of the community compared to now? And then within that, is it some things that happened back then that you wish you could see more of now?
Right. Well, the thing that has changed the most is the ability to get, and maybe it's going to change again, the ability to get support for the outreach that we think is important. There was a time when we first started when people were anxious to provide the support that was needed for us to do the outreach that was necessary. And then we've gone through a long period of time where it's just been very difficult to reach people and to convince people that the support is needed. Now, there has been very little change in what is needed in the community. Things have only gotten more dire, and there's just been more need for communication and support and education. So the job has gotten harder, and the ability to do it has gotten more difficult.
Now, I can't let you guys out of here because you're such gurus in the marketing industry area. I can't let you out of here with giving us 3 good things as business owners we should be looking at in our businesses from a marketing advertising standpoint. Would you mind sharing those 3 things with us? Top 3?
Okay, well, I'll give you one. As an entrepreneur, please keep in mind that you are not in business unless you sell something. So don't get so involved with what your mission is and what your product is and what your space is that you forget that unless you sell something, you are not in business. So that's a top priority.
Yeah, that's good.
It took me a while to understand the connection. I understood it, but to pull it off between marketing and sales. And I became vice president of marketing and sales of a couple of operations. And at one time I had only worked in the marketing department, and I didn't understand some of the challenges that the salespeople faced. Matter of fact, I wasn't particularly concerned about it. But when I became the boss of both operations, then I had to develop a point of view, which was, as we say now, we're all in this together. This team will make it and organize it, and this team will sell it. But we really have a lot of commonality in terms of what our common goal is. And for a long time, I thought I was just a marketing person, but it turns out that you have to be ambidextrous. And ambidextrous is kind of like a basketball player. You have to be able to dribble with both hands, left or right. If you can only dribble left and only dribble right, then if you know anything about basketball, it's easy to Mr. James for that to be for you to be checked. And so that was one of the key lessons that I learned is the importance. And the other thing I learned was about importance. Everyone is important. A long time ago, we were doing some work up in Connecticut, and we got there, and the young lady who was working the front desk, she's sisters, and she was doing her nails and not paying much attention, but we were kind to her and she was kind to us. And we kind of liked this. And so we left, and and she was the guard at the gate. She was the one who was a gatekeeper, letting them in and letting them out. So we left the company, and that Monday we got a call, and it was the lady from the front desk. And she says, "Hi, Mr. Jones, how you doing?" I said, "I'm doing great." And I was really surprised. She called, she hit the number. She says, wanted to tell you something happened that you might not know about. This is the understand it. Everyone is important. She says, all the people on the floor that you were working on, they were terminated shortly after you left, like 200 people, a whole army. And she said, it's just two of us left here. It's the controller and myself, and the controller's writing the checks and I'm mailing them. And I was wondering if you'd like to have yours on top. The least of thee was the most important. And that she got that check to us the next day, like a month earlier than we were supposed to get it. And I learned over and over again how the least of thee can be the most important when things happen. Now, I've seen it many, many, many times.
That's excellent, Lafayette. And another thing to remember, that as an entrepreneur, you're always setting your own standards for success, which means you can't fail. So if something goes wrong, then you set another standard and you work toward meeting that. As long as you don't give up and you're able to set your own standards, then you are never a failure. That's a great thing.
I've been able to put part of this in a formula, and it's called C, D, 2, and F. And it's confidence, discipline, determination, and faith. Those are the four great characteristics that most of the very successful people I have met. They have confidence, and confidence doesn't mean you know everything. Confidence means a lot of things you admit that you don't know, and you get out of the way and let someone else tell you. Determination is, we're going to get this done, and never giving up. And then discipline. Discipline was always my tough area. Discipline. Sandy's a very disciplined person. I've learned that from her. And then finally, one that came to me later on in life was faith. It wasn't that I came from a background where we didn't have good training. My mother would hit me upside the head if I said that, because we went to church a lot. But I left the church after I went to college, and I just had enough of that. Can't play no cards, don't want to dance, none of that. So I decided not to be what I had been trained to be. And then I came back later, and it led to being involved with our church, where I helped to found a community development corporation in the office. Sandy allowed me to work on this by running the company. And I worked on it for about 10 years. In the process, it grew so large, we put it out of our office because that's where we incubated. Today, that organization has created more than $250 million in mixed-use housing and commercial development, and right here in the city we live in. And so I got a chance to work on something that I knew very little about, but it helped in many ways. And the most important thing, I used to come home and I'd say to Sandy, "Oh Lord, what are we gonna do? God, please send somebody because we don't know what we're doing." And you know what? Sent somebody a lot of times, a lot of times. So faith is a pretty important thing to have when you are an entrepreneur. And all the entrepreneurs I know had some little something in a jar, some little publication, something that no one believed in but them. And as Mr. Johnson said, you see, Mr. Jones, see that right there in that little test tube? That's the future of the company. And I'm looking at him and I'm looking at this tube and said to myself, how could that be the future of the company? But he knew. They knew. And so that's one of the things that entrepreneurs have a lot of. They have faith and they have insight into the unknown.
Wow. Wow. I have to tell you, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, this has been an amazing time, a wonderful time. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, your experience, and your heart with us today. I would be remiss if I didn't give you the floor. If there's any last things that you want to address or say to our audience that you may have on your heart, I want to give you that time now to be able to do that.
Well, Sandy always has the last word.
Oh, well, I don't really have anything more. You've done an excellent job, and we do very much appreciate your having us. Let us do it again with you sometime. And
all right, I'm going to hold you to it. You heard that. You heard that, and I look forward to meeting you guys offline as well. Thank you for everyone who has tuned in today to the More Than I Do virtual live podcast. We thank you for being with us today. We want to thank Every.Black. That's the platform that our podcast is on. Jimmy Davis, the founder of Every.Black, his beautiful, beautiful sister, and right hand, Kim. His last name is not Davies anymore, but Kim, thank you so much.
Kim Smith.
Kim Smith, that's right. That's exactly what it is. Yeah, thank you for getting me straight. Thank you guys for being on today, and we look forward for next Thursday, same time, 7 p.m. Eastern. We look forward to being right back here. Derrick and Cherelle.
Yep. Connect with us at morethanIdo.life. That's morethanIdo.life.
All right. And until next time.
See you next week.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.